The sun was setting slow and heavy over the empty Wyoming plain, bleeding gold across the dust when Tom heard the truck rumble down his broken road. A truck that didn't belong to any neighbor he had, not that he had many. He leaned against the porch post, squinting into the distance as a beat-up Chevy came to a halt near his fence line. Out stepped a man in jeans too clean for real work, with slicked-back hair and a face that looked like it had never seen an honest day of pain. In the passenger seat sat a young woman, barely mid-20s, pale, pregnant, and not making eye contact with anything but the dirt. The man strutted up to Tom like he owned the place and said, "I heard you're a man who minds his own business. I got someone here who's a burden to me. You got a quiet ranch and no wife. Maybe she's more used to you than me." Tom stared at him, trying to make sense of the words until the man added, "She's mine, but I'm done feeding her. She's pregnant and useless to me now. I'll take 500 and be on my way." And that was it. Like she was a sick cow, not a human being. Tom looked at the woman again. Her lip was split, her eyes hollow, her hands cradling her belly like a shield. And she still didn't speak, didn't plead, just waited, like this had happened before. Tom's voice came out low and cold. "You're selling your wife?" The man grinned. "I'm selling a problem. What you do with her's your business." Tom didn't have 500. He didn't even have 3. But he went inside, opened the tin can he'd hidden under a floorboard since the year his wife and son died, and counted out $432. He handed it over, watched the man walk away whistling, and then turned back toward the woman still sitting in the truck like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to get out. "You can come inside," Tom said, his voice softer now. She looked at him, just for a second, and in that glance was a lifetime of pain, terror, and something else, the faintest flicker of hope. That night, she slept on the old cot by the fireplace, her arms wrapped around her belly. Tom didn't ask her name, didn't ask what she'd been through. He just made her soup and left a blanket by her side. The next morning, when she woke to the sound of coffee brewing and goats bleating outside, she finally said one word: "Mia." And Tom, who hadn't said anyone's name aloud in years, said, "Welcome, Mia." It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both of them desperately needed. The days that followed moved slowly, like healing wounds, one layer at a time, and sometimes bleeding when you least expected. Tom didn't push her with questions. He gave her space, and she filled it in silence, washing dishes with shaking hands, feeding the goats, folding laundry she didn't mess up just to feel useful. She was still afraid of sudden sounds, still jumped when Tom walked in too fast. But there were moments, small and fleeting, when her eyes softened, like she was beginning to believe she was safe. She told him the truth in pieces. Her husband's name was Dwight, and when she told him she was pregnant, he got mean. Said she ruined his plans, cost him time and money. Then he tried to sell her to a trucker in El Paso, but that man had enough conscience to drive her back. The second time, Dwight found someone desperate enough to take her, and that was when he drove her to Tom. "I don't think he expected you to say yes," she admitted one evening by the fire. "You were supposed to say no. He wanted to prove no one would want me." Tom didn't say much, just looked at her and said, "Then I guess I ruined his plan." And that was the first time she smiled. Not wide, not long, but enough to make something in Tom's chest ache in a way he hadn't felt since before his wife got sick. Mia was 8 months along and barely eating. Tom started cooking heartier meals, beans, cornbread, stew, stuff his mother used to make when the world felt hard. He gave her the bedroom, moved his cot into the barn, and left her alone when she needed it. But one night, close to the end of the second week, he heard her cry out. Not a nightmare. Something deeper. He found her on the floor, gripping her, belly soaked in sweat. "It's early," she gasped. "She's not supposed to come yet." Tom didn't panic. He just acted. carried her to the truck like she weighed nothing, drove 20 miles over bumpy roads to the clinic in town, all while Mia screamed and begged and prayed that her baby would be okay. The nurses took her in, and Tom sat outside, staring at the same moon he used to watch with his little boy before the accident. And for the first time in years, he prayed too, not for himself. For her, for the child, for something good to come from the broken pieces. At dawn, the doctor stepped out and said, "She made it. The baby's tiny but breathing. You can see them now." Tom walked into the room like he was walking into sunlight after years of winter. Mia looked half dead, but she was smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in white cloth. "She's here," she whispered. "Her name's Hope." Tom didn't know what to say, but Mia did. She looked up at him, eyes filled with tears and awe, and said, "You saved us." Tom stepped closer, touched the baby's hand, and whispered, "No, maybe you saved me." The days after Hope's birth were fragile and full of firsts. First, feeding. First time Mia dared to sleep without fear. First time Tom held the baby while she cried, completely unsure what to do but unwilling to let go. The little clinic let them stay for 2 nights, and then they returned to the ranch, now a different place. Not because the land had changed, but because a new soul had arrived on it. Tom built a small crib out of old cedar wood. Mia washed. Baby clothes that had once belonged to someone else's forgotten child, gifted to them by the nurse who had seen too many stories like theirs. But peace was not something easily earned, and trouble wasn't done with them yet. One gray morning, as wind pushed tumbleweeds across the front porch, Tom opened the mailbox and found a letter with no return address. Inside was a short message, printed neatly. "She belongs to me. I'm coming back." There was no name, but they didn't need one. Dwight had found them. Mia went pale, clutching Hope tighter to her chest, eyes wide and haunted like the day she first arrived. "He won't stop," she said. "He never does, not until he ruins everything." But Tom had spent years letting pain sit beside him, like a guest that overstayed its welcome. He wasn't about to let it take over again. He called a friend in town, Rachel, a former lawyer turned librarian, who still knew her way around legal codes. "Can he do anything?" Tom asked. Rachel met them in the feed store later that evening, pulled out a folder and said, "Not. If we prove what he tried to do to her." But it wouldn't be easy. They had no receipts, no signed contract, and Mia, despite everything, had never reported him. "We need evidence," Rachel said. "Messages, witnesses, anything to show. He tried to sell her like property." That meant going back, not just in memory, but in truth. Mia nodded, holding back tears. "I know where he kept his burner phone. If it's still there, it'll have everything." It was a dangerous plan. They'd have to travel back to Texas, sneak into Dwight's old garage, and pray he hadn't destroyed it. Tom didn't hesitate. "We'll go together. We'll finish this." He packed a small bag, kissed Hope's forehead, and told the neighbor to check in on the goats. That night, with Mia in the passenger seat and the road ahead lined with shadows, Tom thought about how strange life was, that he would risk everything not for blood, not for duty, but for a woman he barely knew, and the child that had somehow become a part of his soul. As they crossed state lines, Mia placed her hand over his and whispered, "I don't want revenge. I just want him to never hurt us again." Tom nodded. "Then that's what we'll make sure of." And in that dark cab, with headlights carving through the blackness, 2 broken people held onto the only thing they had left, each other, and the hope that justice for once might be louder than pain. They arrived in Texas under the cover of dusk, parking 2 streets down from Dwight's old garage, a crumbling building half swallowed by weeds and rust, like time itself had tried to bury his sins. Tom stayed watch while Mia crept through the side entrance, heart pounding, her memory guiding her to the loose floorboard where Dwight used to hide his dirty things. And it was still there, a burner phone, dusty but intact, battery dead, but the SIM card untouched. They didn't celebrate. Not yet. Not until they were back across the border, the phone backed up, and Rachel scanning through the files with wide eyes and a bitter laugh. "He was dumb," she said. "Really dumb. Look at this. Texts to 2 other men offering to sell her. Voice messages calling her wasted meat. This isn't just immoral, it's criminal." With her help, they filed a formal case. Attempted human trafficking, domestic abuse, coercion. Rachel warned them. "It'll take time, and it won't be gentle. But it's a strong case. And if it works, he'll never get near either of you again." The court date was set. Mia spent her nights rehearsing what she'd say, though her hands still trembled when she held Hope, who now giggled at sunbeams and reached for Tom every time he walked by. He had become her quiet guardian, the man who rocked her to sleep and sang old country tunes in his gravel-soft voice. When the trial came, it wasn't in some grand courtroom but a modest county building. Dwight showed up in a suit too clean for his soul, flanked by a smug lawyer who tried to twist every fact into a lie. But Mia stood tall. Her voice cracked, but it never wavered. She told the truth, showed the messages, described the ride to Tom's ranch, not as a rescue, but as the first time anyone had ever looked at her like she was a person, not a possession. And when it was Tom's turn to speak, he said one line that made even the judge pause. "She didn't come to me as a wife. She came to me as someone broken, and all I ever did was offer her a safe place to breathe." The verdict came swift and sure. Dwight was arrested, charged not only for his crimes against Mia, but for other women who finally stepped forward after her testimony made the news. Mia was granted full custody of Hope and a permanent protective order. When they returned to the ranch, it was raining, not a storm, but a soft, healing kind of rain. Tom built a swing on the front porch. Mia planted sunflowers along the fence line. One evening, after Hope had fallen asleep, and the stars hung low and bright, Mia sat beside Tom and whispered, "I never imagined peace could feel this quiet." Tom looked at her, then at the tiny pair of boots on the porch, the ones Hope had outgrown already, and said, "I used to think I lost everything when my family died. But maybe I was just waiting to find the right reason to live again." She reached for his hand, and in that moment, they weren't a cowboy and a broken girl. They were survivors, builders, a man and a woman who chose each other, not because they were whole, but because they were brave enough to love in spite of the damage. And that, more than any miracle, was what saved them all.